Hello, everybody. Oh, sorry, it's louder than I thought it was. Hello, and welcome to the first of the Best of Bristol Lecture Series 2015. Woo! It's really great to see so many of you here for the first lecture in the Great Hall for the first time in the history of the Best of Bristol Lectures. I'm not going to say much. I'm just going to hand over in a minute to Professor Judith Squires, the Pro-Vice-Chancellor for Education and Students, who's been kind enough to give us some funding for this series this year, who's going to introduce the whole series. And then I'll hand over to Anna Thierry, who's the President of Deflections, the Civil Engineering Society, who's going to introduce our speakers today, Dr. James Norman. Thank you very much.
It's fantastic to see so many of you here today. As Alex said, I'm Judith Squires, the Pro-Vice-Chancellor for Education and Students, and I'm really thrilled to be helping to support the reintroduction and revival of what has been a fantastic Bristol innovation, which is the Bristol Best of Bristol Lectures. This lecture series was first founded in 2011 by an undergraduate student, Tom Caulfield, and he created the series, and it ran from 2011 in 2012, 2013, and developed a hugely important profile and was very popular. Sadly, when Tom graduated in 2013, it fell into abeyance, and we didn't have any of the Bob Lectures last year in 2014. And I know that many of you expressed the, concern that you had missed them. And so I was really delighted that both Alex Bradbrook and Steve Bullock independently decided that it would be a wonderful opportunity to revive them. Alex, who's the undergraduate education officer at the Students' Union, wanted to use the Bob Lectures as a way of achieving one of the key aims of our Students as Partnerships, Student as Partners initiative. This initiative is a higher education academy project which Alex has been working on with Chris Wilmore, our academic director for undergraduate studies, and they've been looking at ways in which we can empower academic societies to be a core part of our various academic communities. So it's really wonderful that we've been able to work with so many of the academic societies to put on this lecture series. At the same time, Steve Bullock, who is Deputy Warden at Clifton Hill House, wanted to promote the educational role of residencies and was very keen to see the talks happen in the evenings at halls. So we've had a coming together of two different really important initiatives from the university, both student-led as ever, to bring us a really wonderful opportunity to revive the Bob Lecture Series. And I'm really pleased to see that this year we have got an even bigger and better range of lectures available, and we're able to host them both in the Great Hall and in the student residence. And it's wonderful to see so many people booked in. I understand that many of the lectures are already sold out, and it's fantastic to see so many of you here today. The series aims to showcase lecturers from across the university, and I think it's wonderful that we've got not only a diversity of disciplines, but also a diversity of backgrounds. The people who've been voted for come from right across the academic spectrum and right across the career stages, from early careers through to very senior professors. And we've got people speaking to us in the series about a whole range of wonderful things, from the colour of dinosaurs through to researching with children, life on Mars, and today, creative sustainability. We have all 6 faculties represented in the series, and we have lecturers from 11 different schools speaking to us this year. I hope and very much anticipate that this is going to be an annual student-led event. We had over 700 students voting for their favourite lecturers this year, and that just shows how much engagement there has been in this. So I hope that this is going to be a revival that will last. So let me just now hand over to Anna from Deflections, the Civil Engineering Society, who's going to introduce today's speaker.
Hi, my name is Anna and I'm President of Deflections, which is the University of Bristol Civil Engineering Society. Deflections has chosen to nominate Dr. James Norman in recognition for his contribution to our learning. James is one of our most passionate and engaging lecturers. This is reflected in his teaching and ability to keep an entire year awake for 3 hours on a Friday morning, which I'm sure you'll all agree is challenging, and even more so when it comes to concrete. And we believe any person who manages to do this deserves a place on this stage. In addition, James's knowledge on and enthusiasm for sustainability and pioneering use of alternative materials is inspiring. And I'm sure, whether you're an engineer or not, you will learn something valuable from this lecture. And we'd like to pass over to Dr. James Norman.
Thank you, Anna, for the really kind words that you said. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'd just like to introduce myself a little bit further because who I am and what I do really impacts on the way I teach. I've been a practicing engineer for 15 years. I worked on the extension to the new Tate Modern. I've designed a roof in Abu Dhabi, which was 1 kilometre across and cost £300 million just for the roof, not for the rest of the building, just for the roof. But the projects that I'm most excited about and the projects that I'm most passionate about are not the big ones, but they're the little projects which really make a difference in people's lives. I worked on a new extension to my school, the same secondary school that I went to, which was a massive privilege, not just because I persuaded them to build it out of round earth and timber, which are materials that I really love, but more so because the whole ethos of the building really tied in with everything that they taught me, which is that learning isn't just about kind of acquiring knowledge of stuff. It's about more than that. It's about learning so that you can keep learning and so that you can keep kind of pushing yourself and inspiring and innovating and doing all of those things. And that's what that building was about. So it was a real joy to be involved in it. Another project that I'm very proud of is a little wedding facility which was built completely from rammed earth. And I love rammed earth. It's just such an unusual, and I think the word magical is probably not unfairly used regarding it because it's just, it kind of looks different in every light. It's a real joyful material, and I'm really proud to have been involved in projects like that as well as the really big ones. 12 years ago, I came to Bristol University to do a PhD in structural dynamics, and I started teaching, and I've been teaching ever since, and I love teaching. It's kind of the thing that I enjoy most in my week. Paid work, enjoy most of my week. Obviously, I love being with my family and things more, but I love teaching a lot. And I love it so much that actually in January I decided to leave practice behind and just go full-time into teaching because it was the only thing in my work that I really thought about. And my practicing work was all really about learning so that I could make my teaching better. So I'm really excited to now be teaching full-time. I'm also father to 3 children, 3 boys, which is amazing, and the eldest is 10. So that means I've been doing bedtime stories for over 3,000 days, I've worked out the other day. And that's going to come into this talk as well, because when you read a story over and over and over again, you start to need to find a deeper meaning, because otherwise you would go crazy. 5 years ago, I set up a record label because my life was not busy enough, and so I thought I'd just throw that in there. And I've just learned over the last 5 years a huge amount about being creative, and engineers are not renowned for being creative. They're not, people don't think of engineers as the creative types, and yet actually engineers have a huge amount of creativity. They just don't necessarily like to shout about it. And so I've learned a lot about that. And 2 years ago, I met up with some guys from Bristol who run a comic called The Bear Pit, and Bristol is just such an amazing city. It absolutely deserves to be the green capital because there is so much exciting grassroots stuff that goes on in Bristol, whether it's in the field of sustainability or the arts. It's just an incredible city. And so I started writing comics for this little zine that gets published, and only probably 5 people read them. But it's a good challenge for engineers to think about how we communicate not just through our words, but also through our drawings. And so I've challenged myself to kind of do that and to think about that. And all of those things are important this afternoon because I want to bring all of those things and all of those bits and pieces of my life into this lecture. And I want to start A few years ago, I had a crazy idea when I was reading my children their bedtime story, and I thought, do you know what? I think I could use this story to launch my course on sustainable construction. So I kind of thought I'd give it a go. And no one booed at the end, so I figured it hadn't gone down too badly. So I thought I'd have another go. And this year I didn't do it because, if you're my third year students, I didn't do it because I didn't want to ruin the surprise for today, because I'd already decided that's what I was going to do. But this story is really a story that I was read as a child, but for me it has a lot to do with sustainability. You won't see the link straight away, unless you're much more fluent in stories than I am. But hopefully as I talk, everything will become clear. Now, I'd like to read you this story. I have to confess I am far too nervous to use the voices that I use when I read it with my children. But I'd like to read you the story. And it goes like this. "Hello, Dad," said Bernard. "Not now, Bernard," said his father. "Hello, Mum," said Bernard. "Not now, Bernard," said his mother. "There's a monster in the garden, and it's going to eat me," said Bernard. "Not now, Bernard," said his mother. Bernard went into the garden. "Hello, monster," he said to the monster. The monster ate Bernard up, every bit. I think it's worth pausing at this moment just to A, question why Bernard, knowing there's a monster in the garden, chose to go out there anyway and be eaten, and B, the fact that we read these stories to our children, and yet this is an incredibly horrific and brutal event, and yet it's just glossed over. Both things bother me at quite a deep level, but that's not what I want to focus on. The really important thing comes next. Then the monster went indoors. Roar went the monster behind Bernard's mother. "Not now, Bernard," said Bernard's mother. The monster bit Bernard's father. "Not now, Bernard," said Bernard's father. "Your dinner's ready," said Bernard's mother. She put the dinner in front of the television. The monster ate the dinner. Then it watched the television. Then it read one of Bernard's comics and broke one of his toys. "Go to bed. I've taken up your milk," called Bernard's mother. The monster went upstairs. "But I'm a monster," said the monster. "Not now, Bernard," said Bernard's mother. And we're left hanging. Oh my goodness, what happens next? You know, do Bernard's parents wake up in the morning to discover the horrific fact that their son is now dead and has been eaten by a monster who has replaced him? Or does the monster get so hungry in the middle of the night that he goes looking for a midnight snack, and do Bernard's parents no longer exist come the morning? We just never find out. Now, I think that is a really important story, and I'm going to tell you why in a little while. But I want to read you something else first. I've been writing a new course, I'm still going through the process at the moment, looking at how we can teach engineers about architecture. Because my job has always been about working alongside architects to bring buildings to life and to use buildings to improve people's lives. And I'm passionate about helping engineers understand why it is that architects say the weird things that they say, and how can we actually work with them rather than against them, to enable them to achieve their dreams. So I've been working on this course, and I stumbled across this book by a guy called Richard Rogers. You may have heard of him. He's one of the most famous architects in the world, and he wrote this manifesto a few years back, and he says this: despite all our wealth, material and intellectual. Sorry, let me start again. Despite all our wealth, material and intellectual, most of the world's inhabitants are denied the opportunity to lead decent lives. The swollen stomachs and shriveled faces of third world children, the cold and squalor that our own pensioners have to endure, the increasing number of people who live in boxes and doorways stands as an indictment of a society which has the capacity to eradicate poverty but prefers to turn its back. And beyond the exploitation and injustice, which is so central a feature of our civilization, looms the prospect of ecological disaster. Our predicament now is that the means to our emancipation threaten our very existence and the existence of other species. The thing that hugely bothers me about the words that Richard Rogers has written is that he didn't write those last week. He actually wrote those words 25 years ago. And He wrote those words 25 years ago, and I'm bothered at an individual level because as far as I can tell, Richard Rogers designs beautiful, very large office blocks and has actually done nothing to repair the problems that he lists in that book. But I'm also bothered because us as a society are in exactly the same position. We've known about these things for so long. On my flyer, I wrote the words, why, when we have known about the challenges of sustainability, have we chosen to do so little about them? You see, we need to stop saying, not now. Just like Bernard's parents, who are so busy in their own lives that they fail to realize the things that were going on around them, we need to stop saying, not now, and we need to start to act. And I'd just like to talk about a couple of examples of people who have acted. And the first one, this is a really simple example. My son, who is 10, you probably recognize him in the room because he's probably the only 10-year-old daft enough to come and listen to someone talk about concrete. He got really bothered by the fact that the rainforest was being deforested. It kind of ate away at him. I know because every morning when I walked him to school, he would tell me about how awful it was. Now, I don't know where Max got this idea from. It might be from watching TV, it might have been from projects that he did at school. But it got to the point where I got bored of hearing him tell me about how awful it was. And I said, do you know what, Max? You need to stop complaining and you need to do something about it. So we said, well, what can we do? And we discovered that you can buy acres of rainforest and protect them. Now, I don't want to get into the deep kind of philosophical, is that the right thing to do, is that not the right thing to do? I just want to say this. Max decided he'd raise money to buy some rainforest. We talked about options. Does he want to do a car wash? No, too much like hard work. Okay. Does he want to bake cakes? Also too much like hard work. And does he want to write a comic? And he got really excited about the idea of writing a comic. So Max set off and wrote a comic. And to date, he's raised £600 by selling this comic to unsuspecting people. Now, you might not think £600 is a lot of money, but when you're 10, we might be measly, but when you're 10, his pocket money is £1 a week. £600 is the equivalent of his income for 12 years raised by doing something. You know, if we extrapolate that onto our own lives, that would be a phenomenal amount of money. Another person I wanted to talk about briefly was an ex-civil engineering student, Sophie McPhillips, who was the president of Engineers Without Borders. And I just want to say, if you don't know about Engineers Without Borders, I asked them to come this afternoon and set up a stall at the back. Please go and talk to them. They do phenomenal work. They don't care whether you're an electrical engineer, a civil engineer, an aeronautical engineer. They probably don't care if you're not an engineer at all, frankly. They care about changing the world, which is the thing that I care about. And Sophie McPhillips, who has just been, just received Graduate of the Year from the Civil Engineering Institution, she has decided when she left university, she worked for a big company called Atkins, but she went out and she provided clean water for 10,000 people in Africa who otherwise wouldn't have had clean water. And that is an amazing achievement. What I hope for Sophie is that she doesn't stop at 10,000 or 100,000 or, you know, 1 million or 10 million. I hope that she keeps going and keeps going, changing people's lives by providing clean water. I hope that these people, Sophie and Max, I hope that by saying, actually, I'm going to engage in this problem now and do something about it now, I will make the world a better place. Now, I want to read you another story. I hope you don't mind me reading you stories. This one is really funny, okay? So if you're eating your lunch, just make sure there's nothing in your mouth so that you don't upset the person who sits in front of you. Okay. Make sure I zoom the right way. Okay. This book is called Stuck by an author I love called Oliver Jeffers. And it's about a little boy. And it says, it all began when Floyd got his kite stuck in a tree. He tried pulling and swilling, but it wouldn't come unstuck. The trouble really began when he threw his favorite shoe to knock the kite loose, and that got stuck too. He threw up his other shoe to knock down his favorite shoe, and unbelievably, that got stuck as well. In order to knock down his other shoe, Floyd fetched Mitch. Cats get stuck in trees all the time, but this was getting ridiculous. Floyd fetched a ladder. He was going to sort this out once and for all. And up he threw it. I'm sure you can guess what happened. It gets better. the ladder was borrowed from a neighbour and would definitely be needed to be put back before anyone noticed. And in order to do so, Floyd flung a bucket of paint at it. And would you know, the bucket of paint got stuck. Then Floyd tried a duck to knock down the bucket of paint, a chair to knock down the duck, his friend's bicycle to knock down the chair, the kitchen sink to knock down the friend's bicycle, their front door to knock down the kitchen sink, the family car to knock down their front door, the milkman to knock down the family car, an orangutan to knock down the milkman who surely had somewhere else to be, a small boat to knock down the orangutan, a big boat to knock down the small boat, a rhinoceros to knock down the big boat, a long-distance lorry to knock down the rhinoceros, the house across the street to knock down the long-distance lorry, a lighthouse to knock down the house no longer across the street, a curious whale in the wrong place at the wrong time to knock down the lighthouse, and of course, they all got stuck. A fire engine was passing and heard all the commotion. The firemen stopped to see if they could help at all, and up they went, first the engine, followed by the firemen, one by one. And there they stayed, stuck between the orangutan and one of the boats. Firemen would definitely be noticed missing, and Floyd knew he'd be in big trouble. Then he had an idea and went to find a saw. He lined it up as best he could and hurled it up in a tree. And that was it. There was no more room left in the tree, and the kite came unstuck. Floyd was delighted. He had forgotten all about his kite and put it to use immediately, enjoying the rest of his day very much. That night, Floyd fell asleep exhausted. Though before he did, he could have sworn there was something he was forgetting. Now, I think the first thing to say about this story is clearly Floyd was not a Bristol University undergraduate, okay? I think that's fair to say. But what I want to talk about next, and you're going to be amazed by this leap. Before I get there, I just want to make a confession to you all, okay? Anna briefly mentioned it. I have a dark secret. You'll think it's a dark secret. I think it's perfectly normal. I am genuinely, deeply, passionately in love with concrete, okay? Now, not many people will say that. Now, you might think, oh yeah, I know what he means. He means he likes doing the equations and, working things out. That's not what I mean. You might think, well, he likes kind of looking at, pictures of concrete buildings, or he likes kind of the idea of concrete. That's not what I mean. I mean this. When I go into a building with a well-detailed concrete column, okay, I stop and I look at it. And if there's lots of people around, I'll just kind of walk up to it and just brush my hand along it and hope no one notices. And if there's no one around, I wrap my arms around it and I just enjoy the cold, hard surface of the concrete. I love concrete. It is a phenomenal and quite remarkable material. You can do absolutely anything with concrete. The most amazing buildings in the world are made from concrete. We think concrete is boring, but it's not. It's fantastic. It's incredibly beautiful. Where other people see brutality in industry, I see incredible engineering. Concrete is the most amazing material. And so what I'm going to say next is not coming from a position of not liking concrete. It comes from a hard place for me because I love concrete, and yet we have a massive problem. You see, you may not believe this, but concrete is by far the most used material in the world, only second to water. Concrete is by far used more than anything else except for water. We use a phenomenal amount of concrete every day. And every meter cubed of concrete is producing an incredible amount of CO2. It pollutes the planet and it does all these bad things, which as someone who cares about the environment, bothers me a lot. And so over the years, we start to realize that there's a problem with concrete. And people have started to do research and they think, oh, well, if I add this or if I take out that or if I do this process rather than that process, I can make a difference. But what we're doing is we're still making buildings out of concrete. In fact, we use more concrete now than we ever have. We're not changing our approach to concrete. In fact, we're getting worse and worse and worse. And if we're honest with ourselves, just like Floyd, we are stuck. And it's easy to laugh at Floyd. What an idiot. Why is he doing that? Can't he see that he's just doing the same thing over and over and over again? And yet we're doing exactly the same thing. We build buildings every day with more and more concrete. It is everywhere, even on buildings you wouldn't kind of believe they had concrete. I reckon every building almost, maybe there are 2 in the UK built this year without concrete in them somewhere. Okay, every building has concrete. Now, I've spent a lot of time interested in concrete. It's my big passion. I did a project which has been running for about 8 years in different guises, looking at how can we make concrete sustainable? How can we reduce the impact of concrete? And I started looking at maybe can we use something other than cement, because cement is the real kind of problem in concrete. Could we use lime instead? Could we try and change the constituents of concrete and try and somehow make it a little bit better? But do you know what I missed over the whole of those 8 years? Actually, if you want to change the problem of concrete, it's really simple. You just don't use it anymore. You know, I feel like suddenly I've realized that there are other solutions. Why aren't we building buildings that are concrete free? I have a friend who I do a lot of work with in Ramdurf, and he's just gone over to New Zealand. And in New Zealand, they build concrete free buildings and they use timber for foundations. Why can't we do that here? And there is no reason except for the fact that we are stuck. When we have a problem, we just assume that concrete is the only solution. And you see, just like Floyd, what we really need is we need a shift in our thinking. We need to change the paradigm. And paradigm is a word that's used in science and architecture. In architecture, a paradigm shift is where your approach to a building changes. The obvious example is that for many years, people thought offices had to be in lots of single cell with 1 or 2 people sitting in them. And one day someone said, what happens if we take all the walls out? Ooh, what happens if we take all the walls out? And we ended up with open plan offices, which certainly in my experience, I've only really worked in open plan offices and are great spaces to work in. That was a shift in paradigm. And you see, that shift in paradigm didn't occur just the first time someone said it. It occurred because suddenly everyone was doing it. And that's what we need. We need a shift in paradigm where people stop doing things one way and they start doing them another. Not just 1 or 2 of us, not just the people who are really committed and passionate about this stuff. Everyone. We need everyone to change. Okay? And I want to talk to you about a project which I think is really exciting. 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, I started teaching a course on sustainability and sustainable construction, talking about different types of materials, whether it was timber or rammed earth or straw or other strange and wonderful things. And what I discovered very quickly as I wrote this course was I'd read about it a lot in books and I'd never actually done one myself. And so I made a decision that I was going to go and work for a firm who actually did this stuff rather than talk about it. And I joined this company called Integral, who are a great firm. There's 15 of them. And I genuinely, passionately believe that they are doing more in innovation in sustainable materials than the vast majority of the big engineering firms, because they care about changing the world. And these guys, they created another firm called Modcell in collaboration with a chap called Craig White, who is an architect who works for his company called White Design. And what they did is they said, we know that building with straw bale is a good idea. Okay? Now, you may not know building with straw bale is a good idea, but honestly, unless you want me to be here till about 5 o'clock this evening, I'm going to gloss over that. But what I will say is this. I lecture about straw bale, week 20, Friday afternoon, everyone's favourite time for lectures, 2 till 5. You're all really welcome to come and listen. Tell me in advance, because the room fits about 30 people. But if you want to know why straw bale is awesome, come and hear. But just take it from me. Straw bale, building with straw bale is an excellent idea. The problem is, if you've ever watched Grand Designs, you'll know that straw bale is a material only used by people who are frankly a little crazy. You know, you'll almost certainly notice that they're wearing socks and sandals, you know, kind of big crime. So how do we take this material, which we know is great, but no one uses, and how do we make it mainstream? And that was their question, and that was their quest. And they've been kind of working at this for about 8 years, and they've started to make some amazing buildings. They've made a secondary school, which is probably the most sustainable building in the country, called Hayesfield. You should go and check it out if you're interested. They designed the most incredible housing It's actually a housing cooperative called Lilac in Leeds. If you are interested in sustainability, not just in materials, but about anything to do with sustainability, whether it's economic sustainability, the social sustainability, you need to find out about that project. It is a beautiful project. The way they approach things like the funding of the project is incredible and awe-inspiring. And so they use this Modcell, and that what they're doing is slowly but surely, they're making straw bale construction not something for just the odd person, but something for people across the country. It is becoming accessible. And that's what I'm passionate about. You know, we cannot be sustainable with our ideas unless people are actually doing them. Sustainability is not about having a great idea in an academic office. It's about building every building in that way. You know, nothing is sustainable when it's not being done. Sustainability, by its definition, has to be acted on. And so, another story, a really brief one. As a child, I wasn't very good at spelling, okay? The engineers here, you may feel my pain on this one. Okay, I had to go to special lessons because my spelling was so bad. And so my parents, who I love very much, thought it would be character building to play Scrabble with me on a regular basis. Okay? Now, I don't know if you've ever played Scrabble, but if you have, you may well know this scenario. You've got your 7 letters and you're looking at them. And you're looking at them for quite a long time. Let's go with, say, 5 to 10 minutes. Okay, pondering, how could I best get the high score? At some point, my mum would say, do you know, if you put this, and this letter there, you could get a score of 64. At that point, I knew that there was only 2 options. Either I had to find a better score, or I had to accept defeat and go for something worse, because I could not, under any circumstance, accept my mother's suggestion. Okay, it's just not done. Now, that's because I had a level of intellectual snobbery. What I want to say this afternoon is this. When, as intellectuals, as engineers, I value above most things my intellectual capability. Okay? I don't get paid as much as other people, and I don't get to travel around the world as much as other people, but I know that I am intellectually capable. And when someone puts a really good idea in front of me, there is a massive, especially if it's from a competing company who I'm not so keen on, not that I'd have that level of pettiness in me, but especially if that happened, immediately I wouldn't think, what a great idea. I'd think, right, how can I better that? Yeah, it's all right. It's all right. I could do better. And what happens is I spend hours trying to think of a way of doing it better, and I never get there, and therefore I never accept the idea. The point of this story is really simple. For paradigms to happen, sometimes we have to be humble and say to people, your idea is brilliant, I want to use it too. Even if they work for another company, potentially a company that you are kind of battling against to try and win work and all those other things. You have to rise above it and be humble and accept those ideas. Only by doing that do we shift paradigm. So we've got 2 roles. We need to come up with ideas, but we also need to be brave enough to accept other people's ideas. You see, I've got a question. My question that I ask myself when I teach is simply this. If we are designing buildings in the same way in 20 years' time that we design them today, will I have failed in my mission to teach you guys how not just to design buildings, but to change the world, which is what I think we're all about. We're about making the world a better place in the future than it is right now. You know, we have to be about that because that's what sustainability is all about. And so, as I kind of come into the last bit of my talk, I have no idea how I'm doing for time, by the way. I'm sorry, I won't mind if people need to sneak out. I bought this little book in the Arnold Feeney bookshop. I can really recommend the Arnold Feeney bookshop for inspiration. I don't think you'll find many engineers in there, so it's good to sneak in. They have some good books on architecture. And I teach design, that's what I'm passionate about. This is about kind of probably more graphic design than the real, you know, nuts and bolts stuff that I do. But I found it interesting, and in the middle of it, I stumbled across this question. Is the designer an artist or an engineer? And to me, the immediate response is, why do we have to choose? You know, why can't we be both? Why can't we be artists and engineers? Why can't we be creative and also, you know, mathematically intelligent? Why do the 2 things get polarized and separated? Why can't we actually do both of those things together? And so I wanted to just tell you one more story. I've told my second years this, so apologies for repetition. But a year and a half ago, I decided to run a marathon. Now, as you can see, I'm not really the right build for marathon running. I've never done anything like it before, and I almost certainly will never do anything like it again. Okay? But the reason I did it was very simple. I worked in a small firm. There were 14 of them. Everyone else ran marathons. And basically, if I didn't run it, I'd be socially excluded and no one would talk to me. So I had to do it. And it was an amazing experience. I don't regret a moment of it. So I decided to do a marathon. Now, you think, rookie runner, going to do a marathon, which one's he going to choose? Going to go for something nice and flat on the road? No. I decided to do a coastal footpath marathon and all off-road. And I decided that I would choose the hardest coastal footpath marathon that this country offers. So I ran a marathon. Rather than being 26 miles, it was 27 because, you know, when you're paying money to do it, why wouldn't you want to run an extra mile? On top of that, it was more than 5,000 feet of elevation. So actually, I ran an extra mile up into the air as well. And it was the hardest day of my life. I had one aim for this marathon. My one aim was simply this, not to finish last. Seems like a good aim, okay? And I got to mile 16 of my marathon. At mile 16, I was at the back. And in fact, at mile 16, there were 4 of us who were kind of right at the tail end of the marathon. And the 2 of them ran on, and I was left with the guy who I'd been training with. And we ran together for a few miles. And kind of by about mile 19, 20, I said to him, look, you need to go off on your own because actually there's a checkpoint coming up. And if we don't get a move on, we're not going to make it in time. And I'll be honest, I cannot run fast enough to get there in the time we've got. So I sent him off, and at mile 20 on my own, I was feeling pretty grim, a little bit sad for myself, as you do. And I suddenly realized I was actually feeling quite cold. And it occurred to me that I was in the middle of nowhere, properly in the middle of nowhere. And if I didn't, this is in December as well, this isn't like in the middle of the summer. And if I didn't keep running, I was going to have problems just because I was going to get cold. So I forced myself to keep running, and I got to the checkpoint, and I assumed, right, that's it. So I ate all the food that they had left because I was the last person. And a phone call comes through from the race organizer who says, oh, right, okay, you need to choose your checkpoint. And the guy was like, oh, well, we've got someone here. So the race organizer says, well, has he got a head torch? And I was like, no, I've not got a head torch. And the guy on the phone was like, yeah, he has got a head torch. And he was like, the race organizer was like, does he have a coat? And I was like, no, I don't have a coat. And the guy on the phone was like, yeah, he does have a coat. And then he ran and grabbed me a coat and a head torch, and he pushed me off on my way. And I ran the last 4.5 miles, 5 miles of that race. And with about 200 yards to go, I caught up with the 2 people who had been ahead of me, and I hadn't seen them since mile 16. And I sprinted that last 200 yards with my family cheering. By then, the rest of the crowd were gone. And I crossed the finish line. I didn't come last, which was my massive achievement. I did it in just over 8 hours. Now, before anyone laughs at that, you go and do that race course, because it was tough. It was really tough. And I calculated later that if you divide your time by your body mass index, I was right up there in terms of how well I achieved. Okay? Now, the point of this story is really simple. You cannot, especially if you are my build, some of you are looking young and athletic, maybe you could just go out and run that race, but you cannot just run a race like a marathon without doing lots of training. I practiced for hours. I ran hundreds of miles. I had big failures. I ran one day from Bristol to Bath, and I got halfway home and I could not run any further. Okay? My energy was gone. I was just completely busted. And so the simple thing is this. If we want to shift paradigms, don't expect to just walk out the door and go, oh yeah, I'm going to shift a few paradigms. It's going to be pretty easy. I reckon by next week, no one will be using concrete when I've finished. Shifting paradigms is tough. It is really tough. And it requires a lot more practice and a lot more learning from your own failures than running a marathon does. That is for sure. It also requires us to be creative. And that's why I'm passionate about creativity. You know, it is not enough to just keep doing the same things. But to do something different, we need to be creative. How do we learn how to be creative if we never practice? For me, I just had this real learning experience from running a record label. Now, running a record label, for me, you know, when I started it had nothing to do with my job. But what I realized is actually I'm learning to be creative in one place, and it's starting to transfer across to the other. I'm becoming confident. There's no way I'd stand in front of this many people and read them a children's story for 5-year-olds. 5 years ago, it would have seemed crazy to me. It probably still seems crazy to you, but I've learned to be confident, and creativity is twofold in my mind at least. We need to be creative problem solvers, sure, but do you know what? Engineers are brilliant at problem solving. The thing we struggle with is actually telling people that we already know the answer. I don't know if you engineers have ever discovered that, but communication is so important. The ability to tell stories is so important, because when we start telling people stories, we make connections with them. When we make connections with people, they start to trust us. Now, I'll be honest with you, if you go to a client and you say, "Oh, that's a really interesting building," do you know what? Rather than building it from concrete, I could build it from straw. That's a crazy conversation to have with a client. They're not expecting that conversation. And for them to believe that what you're saying is true requires a lot of trust. And the way we build that trust is partly through building relationships, through doing good quality work, but it also involves emotional connections. And emotional connections, I can guarantee, do not come across the table when you're doing calculations together. Okay, I don't know if anyone's ever been on a date where you do calculations together. I reckon it'd be pretty unsuccessful. You see, we need to make connections with people, and the way we do that is by telling stories. The whole reason I've stood up here and told you children's stories and stories about my life is because I'm hoping at some level you are going to believe what I'm saying, because I'm making an emotional connection, I'm not just telling you facts. And so these things are important. Being creative is so important. Investing and practicing over and over again is important. Bob lectures are an amazing opportunity to just open your eyes to just the broad breadth of all the incredible thinking that goes on at Bristol University. And I would 1,000% recommend that you come not just to this one, but to all of them, because it will be brilliant. And as an undergraduate, I didn't have the opportunity to come to anything like this, but I decided I'm doing civil engineering, and I'm going to be a civil engineer for the rest of my life. I'm going to study something different when I have my options, and I decided to do philosophy. I did 2 modules, one in formal logic, still have no idea what that was about, okay, and one in the philosophy of science. And I loved my philosophy of science lectures. They were phenomenal. They were so exciting and so interesting. And what I've discovered just this year is, as I start to learn more and more about the ways we teach design, all this stuff that I learned in philosophy of science is actually being pulled in to all that stuff about how we teach design. I'm like, no way. Something that I learned about and was passionate about 20 years ago is having an impact on what I'm doing now. And so invest in breadth. It is so worthwhile. It is so worthwhile. In Bristol, there is so much going on. Spend time hanging out with people who are changing their communities. There is just so many exciting projects. People are taking abandoned buildings and turning them into homes, community homes. People are I know about loads of exciting grassroots stuff, whether it's artistic or whether it's changing the cultures and the environments that we lived in. And there's the whole Get Green stuff that's out the back, and just go and find out about all the exciting stuff that is going on. Please, don't do it for yourself. Spending time learning about art and being artistic and creative and good storytellers, it's not for your benefit, okay? It's not for your benefit. It's for everybody's benefit, because if you can have a brilliant idea and if you can communicate it in a way that other people think it's a brilliant idea and they start doing it, then that has got to be for the good of everybody. So just to wrap up, I totally lied. There are no 3 simple steps to changing the world. Absolute rubbish, okay? Apologies for that. I hope you don't mind. But here's my thoughts. If you're going to change the world, you need to start now, okay? Now, you might think that's crazy, but I think it's really important. I had an amazing conversation with a student just a few days ago, and they said, I really want to do something amazing, but I've been offered this job to work for a company, and I don't think they're particularly sustainable. And I said, well, what do you think about it? And he's like, well, what I want to do is in the same field as I've been learning about, but I want to do it in a way which is incredibly sustainable. I said, great. I said, you need to go, you need to do that job, you need to learn that job, and every year you need to ask yourself, have I now got enough to go out on my own and do it in a way that is different and sustainable? That is an exciting conversation to have with a young person. And that's what, the process, the now doesn't mean it's going to happen overnight. The whole thing about the marathon is it's going to take years of your life, but it needs to start somewhere. And I think this is a good place. Also, you need to think about, what is it I'm passionate about? What is it that I think should change? What would real change look like? For me, real change looks like not using concrete in buildings, okay, but using something that is renewable and sustainable. Are we ready for that? Do we have solutions? Are we searching for those? And finally, I think that changing the world is tough. Finding answers is tough, but actually communicating those answers is just as hard, and for engineers it's often harder. And we need to practice those things and invest as much, or not as much maybe, but at least in something, in learning about being creative in the same way that we spend time learning how to solve mathematical questions. That's it.
James has kindly agreed to take a few questions if anyone would like to ask a question. If you just put your hand up, we've got a roving mic coming around. One at the back, just down there. Thank you, Gabriella.
What was the name of the community or school you were talking about that maybe...
Okay.
Did you? I'm not sure if you mentioned it or not, but could you repeat that?
Yeah, Lilac at Leeds. So Lilac is an acronym, and I can't remember what it stands for. But if you go to ModCell are the straw bale people. If you go to their website, they'll have links to that project for sure. And the other one was Hayesfield Secondary School in Bath. Again, it's a ModCell project, so if you go to their website, they'll have links to that. That was just featured in the Structural Engineer, and the amount of embodied CO2 is massively negative because of all the sequestered carbon in that fantastic project, locked up in all that straw, which otherwise would just get dug into the ground.
Thank you.
Any other questions at all? To the gentleman just here, just here at the front.
Yeah, I was actually at UE 1972,000 doing a sustainability degree, and my only claim to fame there in terms of the ModCell bit was that I said, go and get the straw from this person when you build the panels. I'm kind of a bit saddened by the kind of ModCell theory, because I built a building in '98 with a group of other people kind of under the radar. I worked as a planner afterwards, so very much under the radar. But we actually free built with straw. I built a timber frame, basically want good boots, good hat, and free build with straw in the middle. The ModCell seems to have engineered straw beyond what I think is necessary. Can you pass the observations?
That's quite a technical question. So what you're asking really is, should straw be load-bearing or should it just be an infill material? So what ModCell have done is they've taken straw really as the insulation. So it's not massively a structural material. The timber frame around it is the structure. Now, I think timber's good as well, but you can build things out of straw without having the timber, but to do that is a lot messier on site for contractors. That's the struggle, is how do we make this material accessible but also buildable? And I don't think it's perfect. I don't think it's the perfect solution. And we have all those discussions in the pub over lunch, debating about could it be better, could they do other things? I think it's a step in the right direction. I think there's a long way to go, and I think the more people start using it, the more people will start questioning, can we do this in an even better way? I don't think the conversation stops there. I think it's a good start. Does that make sense?
Hello, thank you for that. I'm a city councillor and spent most of my life as an architect as well.
Fantastic.
I'm interested that your solutions are organic grown alternatives to a very traditional standard way of doing things. Is there not room for new solutions, things that have not yet been conceived, which are not organic, which may be a much better long-term solution? And why are we building anyway?
To Two fantastic questions. I'm going to answer the second one first because I also asked that question. Why are we building anyway when we've got so much building stock that we could reuse? And in fact, I gave a talk a few weeks ago at Get Green about actually let's stop knocking buildings down and start putting new ones in their place. Let's start reusing the existing buildings we have as much as possible. And that requires a mindset. And I do think that is a really important and valid conversation to have. And that's certainly something that I teach on my course. The second question is about, or the first question was about the materials we use. To me, we're never going to get rid of concrete altogether, and we're never going to get rid of steel altogether because they're good materials. But what I'd like to see is that engineers, to use an artistic analogy, imagine a painter who only has two colours, grey and the bluey colour of steel. Okay, you can only paint so much and do so much with that. I would love to release engineers who, whenever they get a problem, they know about how to do steel and concrete. Of course they do, they're engineers. But they also know about rammed earth and straw bale and unfired blocks. They know about all the different timber solutions. But they also, and this is probably the most important thing, and the thing you alluded to, and what I would love to pass on to my students, I don't know how successful I am, they also have the ability to learn how to use new materials. That we're not limited. I'm not teaching them how to use set materials. What I'm doing is teaching them how to design with whatever material it is that they are designing with. And that they're constantly evolving. That whole thing of, I want the world to be very different in 20 years' time. I don't want students in 20 years' time to be learning the same stuff as they are today. But the reason I say that is because what I teach and what I learned 20 years ago is pretty much identical, which is depressing because civil engineering moves so slowly. And I think we can't carry on moving that slowly. We need to accelerate that process. But I can't say every material that we'll be teaching them to work with. We teach them to use other things like FRPs, all sorts of other stuff. I'm not limiting it to those materials. That's just where my passion lies. Is that okay?
Unfortunately, we're going to have to call it a day there. All that's left for me to say is thank you so much to Dr. James Norman.